This episode is brought to you by WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. At WeatherGuard, we support design engineers and make lightning protection easy. You're listening to the Struck Podcast. I'm Dan Blewett.
I'm Alan Hall.
And here on Struck, we talk about everything aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. Welcome back to the Struck Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett. On today's show, we'll talk about Spirit Aerosystems and how some of the machinists union is fighting back against vaccine mandates, which are mandatory for federal contractors, of which Spirit Aerosystems is a member. We'll talk about the Starliner and how that won't be flying until the second half of 2022 now. Boeing's 777 air freighter plans that are going to put them toe-to-toe with Airbus. We'll talk about some wing drones, the Forkner indictment. A little more news has come out now that we've looked at the charges. And lastly, in our EVTOL segment, we'll talk both about Lilium and ABB partnering on chargers and the very interesting Cyclotech rotor EVTOL, which is back and hovering on YouTube and making some headlines. So, Alan, let's talk about vaccines first. So Spirit Aerosystems obviously is a big supplier to Boeing, among others, and they are now in a bit of a fight with the machinists union. And, basically people don't want to be mandated to take vaccines. And as a federal contractor, that's sort of the lay of the law. So Spirit has told them that they need to be vaccinated to continue to supply them. What's your take on this situation? Is this going to continue to be a problem, or are they going to fall in line?
I think this is going to be a continual problem across the United States. There will be a significant portion of employees that are not going to abide by a mandate like that, and they're going to push back. And if you're an individual, I think that's one thing to push back, but you have to just sort of grin and bear it, because it sounds like the federal government's taking away all testing options. Like, you have to have the vaccination or you don't work. And we're going to pull things like unemployment away, which is really spiteful, in my opinion, which is going to make it worse, right? You're going to entrench employees to fight even more against it. The issue at Spirit and at Textron, everybody's going to have the same issue, is that I think some portion of the employees are not going to respond to it, but they have a union, and the union is strong. And if there was some sort of discrimination happening, or some sort of other type of union versus the employer that affected 10% of their community, the union would go to battle for that historically. So I don't think it's really leaving the union any choice. They have to do this. They're going to have to battle this out. I don't think the union is going to dump their employees. If they do, then it's a huge win for the businesses and the corporations, because you're sort of like union busting. So don't you see this weird dynamic that's happening, Dan? That supposedly pro-union president administration is essentially going to cause a lot of turmoil within unions that are trying to work their way through this vaccine mandate.
Yeah, it's really problematic. On the one hand, I get it, because this is a pandemic. It's a public health thing, so it's bigger than any just one person's individual liberties at that point. But at the same time, I understand about being mandated to put things in your body. So I see both sides of it. It's hard, and yeah, you wonder if what's going to come of this. Now, the one thing I guess I will say is I don't see the big nervousness, and I have some friends who think this as well, and they're like, I don't trust putting that in my body. It's like, well, do you trust all the other drugs that you put in your body? They could they're subject to the same scrutiny, where I see the logic break down for a lot of people. It's like, well, if that's your stance, that you don't trust what could come of it, which is valid, then you also probably shouldn't take any medicine ever, or supplements and other stuff, because you just don't know what's going on. I mean, if that's your standard of proof, then it's a pretty high standard of proof. And if it doesn't apply to everything in your life, then why does it apply to this one? Because vaccines have been around for a long time. But again, like I get it. There's a liberty everyone wants to have here in the U.S., and it's an understandable concern. So yeah, we'll see. This is going to be an ugly fight, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, this is not over. And I think there is a select portion of the population that has a really good argument, which I haven't seen addressed. And I think this applies to medical workers, nurses in particular, physicians, same thing. There's if you're a 20-year-old to 30-year-old female and you're intending to have children, I think there's a significant question in their heads about whether this is a risk or not. And a lot of employees at aircraft companies are women, younger women, that are of age of having children. And I think they're very reluctant to do anything like that. I think they're reluctant to take any vaccine or any sort of medication if they are pregnant. And I think that is going to be a real strong line. It's different if it's like a 40-year-old guy who's working the line, right? I think that's different than someone who is going to have a child. And I think as a union, you got to cover everybody in that situation, right? It could be the pregnant 8-month-old pregnant or 8-month pregnant woman who's still at work and the 50-year-old guy. They both get the same opportunity to be represented, and I just wonder how that's really going to go, because the optics are really bad for the corporation. Even if their hands are tied, I think the optics are bad for them. Don't you think that just looks bad?
Yeah, I know. I agree. It does. Yeah, it's complicated. The thing with pregnancy is definitely an understandable reluctance to take that, and because and so many of the things, like, they can't really do studies on a lot of stuff with pregnant women. A lot of the recommendations, like don't eat soft cheeses, they don't really know that stuff hurts a fetus, because they don't have a control group where they're going to feed 20 pregnant women soft cheeses and 20 women not. Like, that's not an ethical thing to do. So a lot of these recommendations are just very cautious because no one wants to take the risk. And again, human studies, just the ethics are just very difficult. So yeah, it's an understandable thing. So we'll keep watching and seeing what happens. I mean, this is a issue in a lot of industries right now. So we'll see what happens when December rolls around. It's going to be crazy. So moving on, the Boeing Starliner, obviously an embattled spacecraft here. It says they're not going to launch probably in the second half of 2022. They still have not been able to figure out the root cause of why 13 of the 24 valves remain stuck during pre-mission activities. So, Alan, we report a lot of Boeing misgivings these days. Do you think they're going to figure this out?
Oh, yeah. I think they're going to, as soon as they can pull those valves and start cutting them apart and looking at the different pieces to it. Is it corrosion? Is it thermal stress? There's something that should be obvious when you start cutting them apart. Obvious, but the problem is once you start cutting space hardware apart, it indicates that there's a real central issue deep down inside. And when that happens, whatever fix you come up with, and let's say that there is a real simple fix, you're going to have to test the heck out of that before you can implement it back on the spacecraft. And that's where the time is. It's not so much as in determining what the issue is and identifying a fix. It's demonstrating that fix won't cause other issues in the system in terms of a system performance. That's the trouble. So I think getting something off by the end of next year would be aggressive, really aggressive, because of the broad scope of this issue. Don't you think so? Because if it was one, okay. Half, it's a lot. Half of them's a lot.
Like you said, it looks like a manufacturing problem, yeah, that they just need to figure out. Yeah, well, moving on, Boeing sounds like they're set to unveil a 777X air freighter, which is going to compete with Airbus, which has a larger share of the freighter market. Alan, why is this a big deal for Boeing to be, A, entering the freighter market, and B, announcing this freighter version when the passenger version really hasn't come to market yet? As we know, there's a huge freighter market where the long haul passenger service has essentially been cut in half or more because of COVID, and they don't particularly see the 777 having a large number of sales in a passenger configuration. So in the meantime, you need to find that outlet, right? And freight is it with Amazon buying airplanes or leasing airplanes, which is what they've been doing, 767s and some others, and there's rumors of them starting their own little airline. Then
there potential sales. Obviously, FedEx buys a lot of airplanes from Boeing too. Their freighters, the 767 has been the popular one, but this 777 would be also a very doable aircraft because of the new engines and the efficiencies they're putting in that particular upgrade on the 777X. So I think there's a huge growing marketplace because as we all do, right? We all get stuff from Amazon and all these other websites. Somebody's got to fly those parts around, and they're going to need airplanes to do it. So it may become we may get to the day where the number of aircraft that are flying packages is equivalent to or greater than the passenger service stuff, which would be amazing. What a shift! What a shift!
Yeah, well, speaking of deliveries, this company Wing is teaming up with Walgreens to deliver, Walgreens products door to door. They're starting in Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we've talked about drones. They seem to have lost traction the last year. But Alan, what do you think of the Wing drone? It's a pretty interesting little aircraft. It's definitely not what you think of when you think of a DJI drone. These little quadcopters. First, give me your take on the actual aircraft.
I think they're designing it around the package load capability, right? So that if they can haul more stuff, larger items, then the better it's going to be, right? So they have to try to balance, like in the full version EVTOLs, they have to balance weight versus flight duration and recharging, right? So all the designs get revolved around that a lot, and I think you're still going to see some shakeout in that. But don't you think that the Walgreens aspect is really interesting in that you don't think of a pharmacy as a place that would do a lot of deliveries besides prescriptions, right? That the prescription would be the one thing. And Walgreens is a huge player in the United States in prescriptions. But I also think wouldn't they compete with a Walmart in a sense? A lot of the things that Walgreens have is also at Walmart in terms of health and beauty aids, even snack items. Local Walgreens are carrying snack items and milk and bread, stuff like that. So it's almost like a little bit of a grocery store, a little bit of a pharmacy, a little bit of a tools, light bulbs, that kind of thing. So you got to wonder if Walgreens is really thinking outside the box and is going to push into space that, for convenience wise, that you don't want to go to Walmart.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's funny how my views of the pharmacy have really evolved, because when I lived in the suburbs for most of my adult life, I would never really go to pharmacies because, maybe I get a prescription there. But like you said, you can get a prescription filled at Walmart, Target now. And I'm not going to go do grocery shopping at CVS. CVS and Walgreens, they always sort of lived in this in-between where it's not a convenience store. It's got more than that, but it's also got higher prices. So you don't really want to go buy, everyday stuff there because it's got a markup, right? And so, yeah, you're wondering, well, if I'm going to do all this stuff, why would I want to get it done at Walgreens? But now, if you live out in the country, or you live a little farther away, or you're just really on the go, and Walgreens is your pharmacy, then I can get my prescriptions sent over via drone. Walmart, Target can't do that. It's one less trip, so that makes sense. But you're right, with more big box places like Costco, obviously, offers a pharmacy. It's sort of displaced the CVS and Walgreens. Now they're everywhere, so they clearly are profitable. It's clearly a profitable business. Now, what I was going to say is that in the city, so I live in DC, and these are like mini grocery stores for many people. I got printer paper at CVS the other day. Literally, there's nowhere else within a 1.5 mile walk to get printer paper. I could have Amazoned it, but sometimes you're just I don't feel like waiting 2 days, or I just need to go grab this. And that's what CVS is for a lot of people in cities. I mean, there's grocery stores, but they're hard to maintain in the city, right? It's a huge footprint. So they're just more spread out than they are in the suburb. And if you're going to walk and get your groceries and walk home like I am, you're not going to trek out 1.5 miles and walk back with groceries in hand. So these CVSs in the city are much different. Now, that doesn't really play into this drone delivery, but yeah, you could definitely see in rural areas where people are more bought into a certain pharmacy. Obviously, Dallas, it's going to get pretty spread out as soon as you leave the city limits, right? A lot of land out there. I could see this making sense, and I love their video. It's super cool. They show a employee holding out this little, looks like a takeout container, and they connect it, and then the drone, I guess, hoists it up and tucks it in tight and then flies off with it. Like, that's pretty amazing. So it'd be cool to see somebody pull this off. And, especially as people work from home, this probably makes more sense now than it did pre-pandemic, right? You're going to zip home and stop at the pharmacy on the way home from the office prior. Now you're like, I'm not leaving the home. The kids are here, but we need our medication. I don't need to go to Target. I don't need to go to the grocery store for 2 more days. I'll just drone it over here. Could be a good niche, yeah.
Oh, I think so. I wish we're in the opposite situation of you, Dan, in that we're sort of rural, right? And we have a Walgreens, which is almost like it is your small Walmart. That's what it is, right? It's closer. It's community based. So I think there's a huge market opportunity. And boy, if in the wintertime here, if someone can deliver your prescription to your house instead of you trenching through the snow to get to the Walgreens, you would do it. Yeah, you would do it. Totally do it. So yeah, let's keep an eye on it. It's going to be, that's an interesting technology. It's still developing.
So we're going to chat a little bit more about the Mark Forkner indictment. So both Alan and I had a chance to read through the actual criminal complaint. And Alan, let's start with you. So what new information did you learn reading through this? Which this is the first criminal complaint I've ever read. I've read through different lawsuits over the years, and obviously they look similar in form. But this was interesting just to read through this.
Yeah, obviously it wants to highlight the quote-unquote criminal charges that they're going to allege, and so it's basically wire fraud. They're trying to convict him of wire fraud involving aircraft parts. Now, as a flight test pilot, you don't sell parts, and so the connection they make is the pilots all knew that if Boeing sold airplanes, that Boeing is going to make money. So therefore, there's a financial interest. That's a stretch, okay? Boeing's 100,000 employee company, 250,000 employee company. I mean, it's a huge corporation. Selling some airplanes does not going to increase the take-home pay for a flight test pilot. I've never seen that. I doubt that that's a thing. So it isn't like there's a real financial incentive besides selling, Boeing in general, selling some airplanes, okay. But the pieces I pulled out of it were sort of the flow of how the thing broke down in terms of the Forkner was in a simulator. They're doing run-throughs on the simulator, and the simulator started to act funky. The flight test engineer said they're having issues. Okay, awesome. He questioned it. They thought it was MCAS. He reached out to somebody who had been involved in MCAS, and MCAS's guys are saying, yeah, it now operates at high speed and at low speed. Okay. Should that have been conveyed to the FAA? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, the answer in the complaint is yes. So if you grant them that the answer is yes, then that's where this becomes a little more clear.
So, okay. But there's not one person designing this airplane. I mean, there's hundreds of people designing this airplane. And that same information that maybe the flight test pilot knew, the safety people knew. They must have. The people that designed the system must have known. And that makes me wonder if a flight test pilot, FAA flight test pilot, was in the airplane at all, came across that system, maybe activated because of the flight test regimes they were going through. It levies all these things and accuses all these things on one person. There's not one person involved in this. One person didn't have that much control over the design of the system. Maybe if you had told the aircraft evaluation group that it was the MCAS system was working at low speeds, would the aircraft evaluation group would have had a different response on training? That's a maybe. That's a guess. I think that's still a guess. They may have. They may come back and say, yeah, we want to do more training because of the low speed aspects. Awesome. I think that fine. And I think AG hasn't been explicit in saying that. So there's just a couple missing links here. As if you're going to accuse them of essentially causing crashes, the two crashes that have been involved have nothing to do with low speed operation of the system. They're just a couple of different aspects that don't click with me on one person being the linchpin to aircraft problems.
The way I read it, and I think it's laid out in a pretty cohesive way. But they basically said it seems like he was the point man. Like, he was the one who had to tell the FAA and like testify, if that's the word, maybe it's not, to them about what should be or should not be. And that's why the other people that were involved in the project aren't really relevant, because they weren't the ones the FAA was asking the questions to. They weren't the one who was instructed to tell the FAA what was going on about these different things.
That wouldn't be the case in any kind of certification that I've been involved with. The certifications that I'm involved with, each of the individual disciplines, and flight test is a discipline. So from flight test to electrical to mechanical to flight controls, all those different elements, they only focus on one, flight test. The people that did the system safety assessment, who I think knew this was going on, told the FAA. I would assume they would have told their counterparts about it or talked about it. Are we making the case that the FAA knew nothing about the system at all in any aspect ever? I just find that hard to believe.
Well, I think it's just narrow. I mean, I think the point is, which they outline, I think, pretty clearly, which is, when he was testifying to the FAA or just talking to them, whatever term, I don't know the right term, did he withhold information that he knew had changed that should have been in the manual? And it seems pretty clear, like abundantly clear through the criminal complaint, that he did, because they say on this date, here's some correspondence via email, via text that shows he knew this, and then here's another date later where he went in front of the FAA and did not disclose that information, which he should have disclosed. They're not claiming that he caused the crashes. They're just saying, here is the fraud, which is, he had information, he withheld it. He had information on this date, he withheld it on this date. He had numerous opportunities to come clean, essentially, with what should have been in the manual about the MCAS, and he just didn't. So that, to me, is what I pull out of it. I don't know that all the other things about others involved in the program are material or not, because it doesn't seem like they were asked. They weren't in that position where, should this be in it or not? And even if it was, that's separate from what he did.
I don't think they are separate. This is why I say there's multiple aspects to any large aircraft mod. Even small aircraft mods have multiple inputs as to what should happen and how it all should integrate together. So let's just play this out for a second. So the safety people said, and I could be wrong, but I think what the safety people said is that if the system misbehaved, the response is to turn off the horizontal stab. Okay, awesome. So if the safety person is telling the flight test pilots, which I'm sure they did, that the way to address this particular issue is to shut off the horizontal stab actuation system, then I don't know if I'm super worried about that as a flight test pilot. Like, it's the same as if the horizontal stab started to run away at any particular time. I think it had, although the system, I think there's a question about how many times the system should have operated. The people who designed it knew that, and the people who safety assessed it knew that too. Did the flight test pilot know all that detail? I don't know. I doubt it. Let's unwind this one more step. If the flight test pilot knew that the system would react multiple times to force a nose down, he had really a hard, difficult time to get it back. Do you think that they're telling the FAA that the system's fine, or are they going back to the design guys or design team and saying, this doesn't work the way it should, and we're not gonna bless it, certify it? You see how it's like a tangled web when they're trying to pick out one string out of this tangled web and say, well, this is the piece that hold it all together. If this flight test pilot didn't convey this information to this specific group, then the whole thing is a disaster. I think there's multiple opportunities on multiple levels for people to say something about it, and it either didn't come through or didn't get addressed.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that changes. Just like if you're to go sit before Congress and testify and give 99 true statements and give one false one and lie in one line about one fact to Congress, you still lied to Congress. And I think that's what they're highlighting here, is that he had opportunities to explain that the MCAS was now different, that he knew was now different than he had originally told them. He said, leave this out of the manual. This isn't going to be relevant because of X, Y, and Z. And then when those facts change, they're clear that he knew, he went back and didn't didn't tell them. And then, so I don't know that the other aspects of it are significant, but what is for significant is they said they know that this was, and known by him, a significant financial interest, because if he had explained that this stuff the MCS should be back in the pilot manual, that was going to bump it up above a level B certification, which was going to cost Boeing millions and millions of dollars that they were going to have to give back to their customers, because their contracts were written that it was only a level B, where the pilots didn't have to do more training than what was there. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because like you said, there's a lot of veins to this.
Look, just to be clear about this, you shouldn't. There's no need to lie to the FAA, right? There's no situation where that makes any sense at all. Because if you know the aircraft is designed properly, tell them. You can just tell them how it works. It should be a no-brainer for the FAA to buy into your solution. I think that is clear. Don't mess around there. What I'm saying is, there's a lot of missing pieces here of other engineers on the staff saying that the system was safe. There's not just one person. The flight test person is a very important link in all this, but it isn't like they're alone in making the assessment necessarily. That's the part I think that the prosecution is going to have to try to weed through, because the defense is going to highlight that like crazy. Like, there's not one person designing the airplane, and everybody on the Boeing side thought it was safe to go fly.
I'm just not sure if that's the question that they're asking. Is he I don't think the burden of proof is whether he thought it was safe, because he probably did, and even without the MCS being the new version of it or whatever, he probably would have said, yeah, it's safe, but that wasn't the question. The question was, why didn't you tell us this when it changed? It seems like the answer is because it would have cost Boeing millions of dollars and put you in hot water with Boeing, because this was supposed to be a level B training requirement. That seems like the narrow focus of the investigation.
It is, and I think it's an assumption they're going to have to try to make the case. I think it's going to be a lot harder once you get in that courtroom than what it seems on paper.
So moving on, the Cyclotech cyclorotor is back in the news cycle, which this is an interesting one we talked about, I don't know, maybe a year ago, Alan. So this one is probably the closest to that sort of Blade Runner 2049, where you could have one of these essentially in the wheel well. I mean, if you haven't seen this, it's got 4 rotating drums, a lot like 4 tires on a car. And Alan, how does this work, and how does it generate lift? Because there's a video on YouTube that we'll link to that shows that this thing can get off the ground for sure.
Oh yeah, it's like a helicopter blade that's been cut into quarters or 6 and then put on a drum so they spin instead of whirling around above your head. So it's a different configuration. The aerodynamics are similar in that with a helicopter blade you can change its angle of attack, and you can make the helicopter go up, down, left, right, those kind of things, right? So it has sort of all those features built into this high speed rotating drum. I don't remember how many RPM, Dan. Do you remember how RPM those drums are moving at? That's fast.
I don't, but they're boogieing. They're boogieing.
Yeah. And I think Dan's right. I mean, it is like something you see on a sci-fi movie. It has advantages, right? In which you named, which is it's compact, right? That you don't have those big whirling blades spinning around. So it does look like tires or wheels on a car. It's about the same width. But the question is, we've seen it. If you watch a YouTube video, and I encourage everybody to go watch it because it is a cool piece of technology. It's inside a hangar. So they're lifting it off and kind of floating it around and bringing it back down inside a controlled airspace. No wind, right? So what happens when I take it outside? I don't know yet. I'm sure there's a lot of flight control dynamics that they have to work out on how it needs to operate. But the one thing we were talking about before recording the show was how much energy does this thing use? Right? Is it efficient? Right? Because I think that's going to be the driver is compact. But if I'm using battery power, it seems like I'm not super efficient.
Yeah, it's obviously that's a bottleneck even for the traditional, if you call any EVTOL traditional at this point, right? I mean, can they get the the flight time and all that, given the energy density of current batteries and then the weight of batteries? How much battery weight can they have and still have passengers and do the job and all that stuff? So the question is, if this is viable, how far in the future is it? How much battery power does it need? All that sort of stuff. But yeah, as far as like safety goes, yeah, we don't know. And I'm sure as you know, this will be hard to certify because it's unlike anything out there to compare it to, right? But at least from the safety standpoint of, if you're flying this in a city in the distant future, a la Blade Runner or something, this one seems like it's not going to, decapitate a ton of people like a helicopter could, or, any of those scary scenarios, which are unfortunately scary scenarios, right? And this one seems like, hey, this thing's just moving around kind of like a car, has each of these rotating drums in the wheel wells, essentially. And it honestly reminds me of that Blade Runner style, hovering car. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions, but it's cool that it's progressed, because you figured, I think this one was the one that was just like wasn't really going to go anywhere, but it's still moving around and still seems like it's progressing in some direction. But as you've mentioned many times, it takes a lot of money to keep these programs going, and how long are investors willing to wait?
That's a good question. I always say it starts at 500 million and probably ends somewhere around $1 billion for something like this. And if you're going to put it into mass production, yeah. So that's a lot of fundraising. That's a lot of money. It just is.
So we'll keep an eye on it, but yeah, definitely interesting. Best of luck to them. I mean, like I said, I would love to see hovering cars a la Blade Runner. That seems super cool. And so they seem like maybe the front runner to have that sort of vision of the future come to fruition. So last on the docket today, Lilium and ABB are partnering to get charging technology going a little further. So obviously, LA is leading the charge. Los Angeles here in the US is leading the charge on getting the infrastructure built to allow EVTOLs to be successful. Just like with electric cars, they had to have a charging network, which is still rapidly being built up. So, I mean, these charging ports from ABB will hopefully allow EVTOLs to be charged in about 30 minutes, up to 80% in 15 minutes, which is pretty fast. And obviously, we were talking about fast charging technology recently and how it's rapidly improved. So why do you think Lilium is so concerned right now? Is everyone just trying to get their own sort of piece of the infrastructure future?
Oh, absolutely, because you control the landscape, especially on the marketing side. That's why Tesla is, if you look at the Tesla chargers, they say Tesla and it glows red and looks like a spaceship is landing. You plug your car into it. There's a lot of marketing in chargers, right? And you want to get the supercharger, not the standard charger out of Tesla, because it charges your car faster. That all plays into marketing and sales because it's a sweet spot. I think hooking up with a charging company, an electrical company that does sort of industrial charging, makes a lot of sense, and doing it sooner rather than later, because you need to get that infrastructure in before you deliver the first aircraft, because you can't deliver an aircraft and have no place to plug it in. You have to have it ahead of time, right? So you got to give those companies time to develop the charging infrastructure and get it installed in the airports in which you're going to operate, so that your product is then successful. The one thing I keep wondering is, what's the connector? Is it like the iPhone where you have to have a specific plug, or is it going to be a universal charging port? Because even the Tesla charger is different than other car manufacturers' chargers. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think there's a standard today.
Oh, there's probably not. Yeah, probably not.
How's that going to work?
Yeah, well, and that's, I think, a thing that's been changing, because over in Europe, I was going to say in the EU or UK, I'm not sure exactly, but over in Europe, they're pushing Apple to, and every manufacturer, but notably Apple, since they have their Lightning charger, their Lightning connector for phones, to get to a universal standard, because they're like, look, there's 1 million phone chargers ending up in landfills, and these cables that we don't need to have. Like, we have USB-C. Can we all just do USB-C, please? That's basically, like, it seems like the battle cry. which makes a ton of sense. Like micro USB, no one likes it. It's on its way out, right? It's not a double-sided connector. The Lightning is Apple exclusive. So Apple likes it, but no one else really cares. I mean, people ultimately don't care anymore. They're all small. They're all efficient. So let's just take the one that's double-ended, which is the USB-C. You just, shove it in whatever orientation and it works. That's great. So you wonder if we'll have to fight this same fight again with car chargers and airplanes, or if we can just look, let's just start right away. Let's find a universal and just get to it and stick with it from the beginning. That seems like the best thing for the environment and for everyone in general, right?
Yeah, I think so. And because you run into two potential problems here. Installing, if there's any chance you could put a wrong charger on an airplane, it's a big deal because you could damage the battery system and cause yourself $100,000 worth of damage. So coming to a standard here would be really smart for the industry.
Yeah, and I think like you said, just getting that from the get-go rather than going through the growing pains of having to sort through them, that would be terrific. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Struck Aerospace Engineering Podcast. Thanks so much for listening, wherever you are on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to the show, share with a friend, and we will see you here next week on Struck. Strike Tape, WeatherGuard Lightning Tech's proprietary lightning protection for radomes, provides unmatched durability for years to come. If you need help with your radome lightning protection, reach out to us at weatherguardaero.com. That's weatherguardaero.com.